welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and you need to stop stealing the win away from yourself. What do I mean by that? Well, as I've mentioned before on my channel many times, I do my Deck Doctor videos on my Patreon for my patrons. The link is in the description below. If you're at all interested in getting a Deck Doctor from me, feel free to join up. And what I do there is I just look over my patrons' decks and critique what would I take out, what would I put in, stuff like that. And in fact, I've got a lot of videos on my channel that are based off of what I see in my Deck Doctor videos. One thing I've seen quite a few times is what I call stealing the win away from yourself, which is I'm making this really interesting deck that's doing this really interesting thing. Even if it's not super interesting, I'm building around a particular theme. That's essentially what almost every commander deck is. Whatever it is that you might have that you're building your deck around, whatever your deck is trying to do, you're doing that thing. And then I throw a Torment of Hailfire in there. What's that got to do with the deck? Now, I imagine there are a couple of decks out there where Torment of Hailfire might actually fit as a win con. And of course, a lot of people will respond to this video saying, oh, well, Torment of Hailfire is just a win con in any deck. And that's exactly why I don't think you should put it in your deck. You're stealing the win away from yourself. Why? Because you put all this effort into building this really interesting deck. I mean, maybe you didn't put a lot of effort into it, but for the people that did, you put all the effort in and then you're just throwing a Torment of Hellfire in there and you use that to then win the game, and it almost erases everything you've done before that. Everything else, all the effort you put into your deck is almost meaningless now because at the end of the day, you just won with a Torment of Hellfire. To me, that feels like you're stealing the win away from yourself. I got the idea from this video because a patron of mine made a grandeur deck, an idea I came up with a while ago. I made a video about how I think it's a super underrated ability in the format, and it actually, even though it doesn't seem to fit, can be an interesting ability to build around. And they went ahead and built their version, a black, white, blue version. Very interesting deck. Again, they're putting all this effort into building around this really unique, obscure ability. And then they're kind of stealing the win away from themselves, in my opinion. And here's exactly what I said. I don't think you need this. This is just good stuff. I'm going to make a video on my channel. And I talked about it did I talk about it in the last Deck Doctor? I talked about it in a Patreon video, and I'm like, man, I got to make a video for my channel about that because I think it is really important. I call it stealing the win away from yourself. I'm going through all the trouble to make this really, and this is a perfect example. I'm going through all the trouble of making this really interesting grandeur deck where I clone, and all that. And then I just win with Rise of the Dark Realms. And it's like, you're just stealing the win from yourself. You put all this effort in to make this really interesting deck and you're just going to cast this. To me, that just feels bad. I mean, you stole the win away from yourself. There's no better way to say it. I am putting in all the effort to make this super interesting deck and I'm winning with this, right? Or Torment of Hailfire or any of those big splashy I win the game cards. To me, you're dunking on yourself by doing that. Like I am now recommending do not play any. I don't play them anyway. Again, Craterhoof Behemoth is, for me, that's one of the reasons why I've never played it, is just because this card is winning you the game, right? You might as well be playing a mono black Erebos deck and I Rise of the Dark Realms and I win, or I Torment of Hellfire and I win, right? Any deck you put Expropriate in, as soon as you cast that Expropriate, does it really matter what your deck was doing? I guess if you copied it, if you're doing a Spellslinger copy theme, I guess it gets even better, but it doesn't even matter, right? Expropriate won you the game. Rise of the Dark Realms won you the game. Torment of Hellfire won you the game. Doesn't matter what your deck is doing. You might as well be playing your deck is meaningless. That card won you the game. That's why I don't like doing stuff like that. It's another reason I don't like playing infinite combos, because it doesn't really matter, right? I could throw a Kiki Jiki Deceiver Exarch into any red-blue deck. Doesn't matter what my deck is doing, and if I happen to assemble the combo, then I win. But then what's the point of my deck? What's the point of all that other stuff I was doing, right? Just really undoes all the effort. And again, as a deck builder, this process is so important and so unique that you're just you're undoing all the work you put in my opinion, right? You're stealing the win away from yourself. Now, am I saying don't play Rise of the Dark Realms, take that card out of your deck. I mean, to be honest, I've never been a huge fan of cards like this. When I first started playing cards like Torment of Hellfire, Exsanguinate, Rise of the Dark Realms, I saw them in every game. They were the cards that you just slotted into every deck because they were essentially I win cards. They were cards that as soon as you got the appropriate amount of mana, 7, 8, 9 mana, whatever it was, you cast them and you usually almost always won the game. Now, it's okay if you want to do that. That's fine, but I think you're stealing the win away from yourself if it has nothing to do with your deck. Obviously, Rise of the Dark Realms actually does work in some strategies. If you're playing a milling strategy, for example, right? You're playing that Phoenix deck, you're milling all your opponents. This can be a little bit of an alt win con where obviously you're intending to mill your opponents. That's the win con for your deck, but Rise of the Dark Realms can kind of be a little bit of a backup. Maybe your opponents are playing Elixir of Immortality and stuff like that, and milling them out is getting to be really difficult. Rise of the Dark Realms can be a little bit of a backup that actually works in your theme because, of course, everyone's graveyard's full of creatures and you can reanimate them all and kill them with it. I actually think it works there, but it has nothing to do with what your deck is doing. I think you're just stealing the win away from yourself. Like that deck by my patron, which was a really interesting, unique, grandeur-themed deck. Rise of the Dark Realms has nothing to do with any of that. It doesn't really fit, and he's just taking everything that he did there and sort of ignoring it by using Rise of the Dark Realms as an easy win con. Probably the best example of this ever, as I mentioned in that little clip, is Expropriate. To me, this is the most obvious, I just win the game card. It doesn't really fit particularly in any theme. You know, again, like I said in that video, it sort of fits this instant sorcery theme a little bit because it is a sorcery. It certainly is a good spell to copy and get other effects of it. But at the end of the day, this just becomes the card that wins you the game. Whatever else your deck is doing really doesn't matter, does it? I guess if you're playing a Mizzix deck, right, this became like the #1 win con in Mizzix decks because obviously your Mizzix is allowing you to cast it for cheaper, but at the end of the day, that's all that's really happening there. Expropriate is now winning you the game. Any deck can just be, I'm just going to sit here and dirtle along until I can cast Expropriate, right? That's why I've always not loved those cards. I can just sit here dirtling, doing just about anything in my deck, just play some counterspells, some removal, do whatever, and then once I draw or tutor for my Expropriate, I essentially win the game. So what else I'm doing in my deck doesn't really matter a whole lot. If it actually fits what you're doing in your deck, okay, great. I think you're just stealing the win from yourself if you are actually putting the effort into building a commander deck that does this unique, interesting thing. If you're not, then I guess it doesn't matter, right? If you're that guy who wants to play that mono black good stuff deck with Erebos at the helm, like I used to play against all the time, and of course, when Torment of Hellfire came out, which was right around the time I started playing the commander format, of course, everyone just put that in their deck. If that's what your deck is doing, then obviously you're not going to change a whole lot, right? I just get my Cryptghast in play or my Cabal Coffers in my Urborg, and then I cast a giant Torment of Hellfire and I win the game. That's what those decks are essentially doing, so you're not stealing the win away from yourself, because that's exactly what you're meaning to do in the deck. But I will say, Torment of Hellfire doesn't really fit any theme, does it? What deck does Torment of Hellfire specifically fit? I guess maybe a Tergrid deck because it's forcing your opponents to sacrifice stuff. Other than that, really, I can't think of anything. But a lot of people might say, okay, well, for that reason, it fits every theme, right? Because, of course, you always want your opponents to be losing life and you always want them to be discarding and you always want them to be sacrificing permanents. Okay, I guess you could make the argument that Torment of Hellfire fits in every deck, so it synergizes with every deck. You could make that argument, but for me, if your deck is doing something specific that Torment of Hailfire or Expropriate or any of these cards doesn't specifically fit, I think you're stealing the win away from yourself. You put all this effort, again, if you are one of those people that is putting all this effort into building around a certain commander or building around a certain theme, whatever your method is for building commander decks, by putting these essentially I win cards into your deck, you're kind of stealing the win away from yourself and you're kind of taking the whole purpose out of the deck building process, in my opinion. I will say cards like this, which I used to see in like every single commander game when I first started playing the format, have certainly lost popularity. I don't see them much anymore. And I am glad that is the case because for me, they're just very unfun I win cards that don't usually fit any theme that you are doing in your deck and possibly steal away from you what could be a very satisfying win which again, doesn't really matter what else you're doing in your deck because this card is doing all the work, right? So try to avoid those cards if they don't actually fit with what you're doing. Obviously, there are cards like that that will fit, but the cards like the Rise of the Dark Realms and the Insurrections and the cards like that I used to see in the format like crazy, do they really fit the theme of what you're doing? And if they don't, maybe take them out of your deck. That is my advice for you today. You guys let me know in the comments below if you're playing any cards like this and maybe you're going to take them out of your deck now. I hope that you will. That is it for today though, and thanks for tuning in.